The flight attendant's voice was sharp enough for everyone to hear across the cabin. "I'm going to ask you one last time. Move to the back of the plane, or I will call security." Lauren's words sliced through the air, dripping with condescension. Naomi, the calm and composed black woman seated in the plush first-class section, looked up at her unfazed. "I've already told you, I'm not moving," she replied simply, her voice even, almost soothing. But beneath the surface, there was an undeniable strength, a quiet defiance that no one expected. In that moment, Naomi was humiliated in front of the entire cabin. But no one could have predicted what would happen next. When the woman they thought was powerless stood up and revealed who she really was, everything changed. If you believe everyone deserves respect, no matter what their color, hit the subscribe button now and let us know where you're watching from. The tension in the cabin mounted as Lauren stood over Naomi, her posture rigid, her eyes narrowed in disbelief. Naomi, calm and poised as ever, could feel the scrutiny of every passenger in the cabin, their gaze shifting from the flight attendant to her. No one expected what would happen next. "Ma'am," Lauren began again, her voice strained as she stepped closer. "I've asked you nicely. You need to move to the back. This is a first-class section, and you don't belong here." The words were blunt, carrying a sharp edge, yet dripping with an unspoken bias. Naomi's eyes remained steady, unyielding. "You've asked me twice already, and I've answered," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had endured these types of situations countless times. "I'm not moving." The passengers were shifting in their seats now, some staring openly, others pretending not to notice. It was clear the situation was escalating, but Naomi refused to let her composure slip. Her gaze never faltered, her posture remained straight, the calmness in her voice unshakable. Naomi wasn't just fighting to keep her seat. She was fighting for respect, for every single person who had been looked down upon because of assumptions about who they were. Lauren huffed in frustration, unable to hide her irritation any longer. "Fine," she snapped, turning her back to Naomi. "I'll have security called. You'll see, you can't just sit here because you think you can." Naomi watched the flight attendant storm off down the aisle, her heels clicking against the floor. As the minutes ticked by, Naomi's thoughts weren't on the confrontation itself, but on the countless times she had been dismissed, treated as less than, all because of the color of her skin. But today, Naomi wouldn't allow that treatment to stand. She reached into her bag and made another call, her eyes glancing around the cabin one last time. The passengers had stopped whispering now. Some looked at her with sympathy, others with curiosity. Naomi's calm demeanor had shifted the atmosphere. The tension that had previously been in the air now hung heavy, an unspoken anticipation of what would come next. Lauren's eyes narrowed as she walked toward the front of the plane, her mind racing. She had made her decision, and there was no turning back now. Naomi remained seated, her eyes still fixed ahead, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She was the picture of composure, every inch of her unwavering in the face of the flight attendant's hostility. It wasn't long before Lauren returned with a sense of finality. "I've made the call," she announced to Naomi, her voice now clipped with irritation. "Security is on their way. I'm not going to let you get away with this." The other passengers were watching now. No one made a sound as the scene played out before them. Naomi could feel their eyes on her, but her focus remained solely on Lauren. The silence in the air was thick with anticipation, the hum of the plane's engines almost too loud, echoing the tension in the cabin. Naomi leaned back slightly in her seat, not flinching. "Security?" she repeated softly, her voice steady but cutting through the air. "If you're going to call them, you might want to make sure you've checked your records." Lauren's brow furrowed. "I don't need to check anything. she replied sharply. "You're in the wrong section, and I don't care what your excuse is." Naomi's calm voice didn't change. "You're making a mistake. I'm not just another passenger." She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone once more. "In fact, I'm the owner of this plane and the airline you work for." The words seemed to freeze the air around them, the shock in Lauren's eyes evident. The passengers, who had previously been mere observers, now seemed to shift in their seats, unsure how to respond to the sudden revelation. Naomi leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking with Lauren's. "I suggest you start rethinking your approach," Naomi added, her voice now carrying the weight of authority. "Because everything you've done here is unacceptable." The room went completely silent as the weight of Naomi's words settled in. Lauren's face drained of color as the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The passengers around them shifted uncomfortably, some exchanging looks, others glancing nervously toward the front of the plane where the tension had reached a boiling point. Lauren stood there, frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. She had just attempted to humiliate this woman who had now revealed herself to be the owner of the plane and the airline. Naomi's calm, authoritative presence had shattered every assumption Lauren had made, and now she was left with no way out. I didn't know," Lauren stammered, her confidence crumbling. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." Naomi raised her hand slightly, silencing her. "You didn't mean to disrespect me," Naomi said slowly, her voice still calm, but now edged with a firm authority that cut through the air. "But you did, and now you'll have to face the consequences." Naomi stood up from her seat, her movements deliberate and graceful. "I don't take these things lightly," she said, her eyes scanning the room, making sure every person understood the gravity of the situation. "And I won't tolerate it in my airline." The passengers, who had been silent witnesses to this moment of confrontation, now seemed to relax as Naomi took charge of the situation. Some nodded in approval, while others looked on in awe of Naomi's strength and leadership. Lauren, still standing, took a step back, her gaze darting around the room, searching for support. None came. Naomi's quiet authority had not only shifted the power dynamic in that moment, but had also captured the attention of every person aboard. "Security," Naomi said simply. "Call them. I'll wait." The weight of the moment hung in the air, the tension palpable as Naomi stood in the center of the plane, her every movement radiating quiet strength. Lauren, on the other hand, had become a shadow of her former self, her posture slumped in defeat. It was clear now that she had no power over the situation. Naomi's words had shattered the illusion of control that Lauren had tried to maintain. The flight attendant fumbled for an excuse, but Naomi's steady gaze silenced her. Naomi, still calm and poised, had made it clear that there was no room for prejudice in her presence, and that message was beginning to settle with everyone watching. Passengers exchanged glances, some looking ashamed of their quiet complicity, others watching Naomi with newfound respect. The jet that once felt like a luxurious fortress of privilege now seemed to shrink in the face of the real power that Naomi exuded. "You've made your assumptions about me, but now you know the truth," Naomi said, her voice firm and resolute. "It's time for you to face the consequences." Naomi turned toward the back of the plane, her eyes scanning the passengers one last time before she returned her focus to Lauren, who stood frozen, clearly overwhelmed by the weight of her actions. Lauren's face was drained of color as the reality of the situation began to set in. She had assumed she could intimidate Naomi into submission, but now she realized that the tables had turned. Naomi wasn't just a passenger. She was the owner of the very airline Lauren worked for. Naomi's calmness in the face of such blatant disrespect was unsettling, even more so because it was clear that Lauren's behavior had been the result of deep-seated bias. Naomi had always known that power was not about appearance. It was about command, and she held it in abundance. "Are you going to call security?" Naomi asked, her voice steady, as though they were discussing an everyday transaction. Her composure was a stark contrast to Lauren, whose panic was evident as she fumbled for words. I didn't mean to," Lauren started, her voice trailing off. Naomi didn't let her finish. It doesn't matter, she replied, her words cutting through the air with clarity. What matters now is that you're held accountable for how you treated me, and how you've treated countless others like me. Lauren shifted uncomfortably, trying to regain her composure, but Naomi's presence had already taken control. The plane seemed to grow quieter. The buzz of passengers hushed as the weight of Naomi's revelation reverberated through the cabin. Naomi's simple declaration had left Lauren visibly shaken, her entire sense of authority crumbling in real time. Naomi's gaze never wavered as she spoke again, her words directed not just at Lauren but at the passengers who had witnessed the exchange. "This is a lesson not just for you," she said, addressing the flight attendants now standing nervously in the aisle. "This is a reminder for everyone aboard that respect is non-negotiable. You don't get to choose who deserves it based on assumptions." The passengers, once passive observers, now seemed to lean forward, caught in the gravity of the moment. Naomi's words echoed across the cabin, not as an accusation but as a clear directive. She wasn't just defending herself. She was setting the standard for how people should treat one another, regardless of race, appearance, or status. "Your actions have consequences," Naomi continued, her tone unwavering, "and I'm here to ensure that those consequences are felt." Naomi's calm and steady presence had become the foundation on which this confrontation was built. As Lauren began to realize the depth of her mistake, the power dynamic shifted entirely. Naomi had taken control, and now there was no turning back. Naomi walked toward the front of the plane, her footsteps deliberate and purposeful, the other passengers watching closely. She paused just in front of the cockpit door, turning back to face Lauren. "You're not just going to walk away from this," Naomi said coolly. "You've made a serious error in judgment, and now I'm going to make sure it's corrected. Effective immediately, I'm placing you on suspension until further notice. I'll be speaking to your supervisors about this." The weight of Naomi's words left Lauren speechless. The flight attendant's eyes widened as she realized the severity of her actions. The passengers, who had been watching in stunned silence, now turned their eyes toward each other, murmuring quietly among themselves. Naomi didn't wait for a response. She turned on her heel and addressed the flight attendants in a calm but firm voice. "I'll be filing a report about this incident. I expect to see immediate changes in how this airline treats its passengers, every passenger." The shift in the atmosphere was undeniable. The flight attendant's previously confident demeanor was now replaced with palpable fear, and Naomi's authority seemed to grow with every passing second. The room was still, save for the soft hum of the plane's engines and the occasional rustle of passengers shifting in their seats. Naomi's presence seemed to fill the space as she moved with deliberate purpose, making sure every person in the cabin understood the gravity of the situation. Her gaze never faltered, and every movement exuded authority. As she turned to face Lauren once more, Naomi's voice was steady but unmistakable. "I want a full investigation into your behavior, Lauren. This isn't just about you trying to push me to the back of the plane. It's about how you've treated me, how you've treated other passengers in the past. This stops now." Lauren stood rooted to the spot, her body language defeated, her face flushed with humiliation. Naomi didn't look at her with anger, but with something far more powerful, disappointment. She had hoped that Lauren would have recognized her own biases before it came to this, but Naomi knew better than to assume. The passengers, who had once been bystanders to this private confrontation, were now fully engaged, their eyes trained on Naomi as she took charge of the moment. They could see that this wasn't just about a single disrespectful flight attendant. It was a larger statement about the need for change. "Do I make myself clear?" Naomi asked, her voice quiet, yet carrying weight. Lauren's nerves were now on edge. Her breaths came in shallow gasps as she struggled to come to terms with the power shift. What had started as a simple interaction now felt like a personal failure, the weight of Naomi's words sinking in deeper with every passing second. Yes, of course," Lauren stammered, her face red as she glanced around at the passengers who had been witnesses to this escalating situation. They no longer looked at her with respect but with disdain. Naomi's influence had turned the tide completely. She had not only controlled the situation but had made Lauren's previous behavior seem like a blatant affront to the very principles of respect. Naomi's gaze softened slightly, though her composure remained unshaken. "I'm not doing this out of anger, Lauren," Naomi said calmly, her voice still carrying that quiet strength. "I'm doing this because it's time for a change, time for accountability, and I will make sure it happens." Lauren didn't respond. She simply nodded, her eyes cast downward. The sound of her breathing was the only noise in the cabin now, the tension almost unbearable. Naomi turned away from her, signaling the flight attendants to prepare for the next steps. "I'll be addressing the crew shortly, but first, I think it's time we all took a hard look at how we treat each other on this airline," Naomi said, her tone now slightly softer but no less firm. The cabin remained eerily quiet as Naomi moved forward with her decision, her next steps clear in her mind. She had already taken control of the moment, but now it was time to ensure that this incident led to tangible changes, not just hollow promises. "Lauren," Naomi said, her voice cutting through the silence, "I want you to go to the back and wait for the captain to arrive. We'll need to discuss this further with senior management. In the meantime, I'm going to make sure your actions aren't ignored." Lauren looked as though she wanted to protest, but Naomi's steady gaze stopped her before she could speak. The flight attendant simply nodded and turned, walking quickly to the rear of the plane, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Naomi's focus shifted to the rest of the passengers now, the hum of the plane somehow quieter than before. She stood tall, addressing them directly. "This isn't just about one incident, one individual. It's about how we all can do better. How we all have to step up to make sure things like this never happen again." Her words hit home with the passengers, many of whom had witnessed the ugliness of prejudice firsthand. Naomi wasn't just speaking to them as the owner of the airline. She was speaking to them as a human being who understood the stakes of this moment. "This is my promise to you," Naomi continued. "You will see change, real change, and it will start now." As Lauren quietly waited at the back of the plane, Naomi addressed the crew members who were still lingering near the aisles. The passengers seemed to hold their breath. The tension now transformed into a feeling of anticipation for what Naomi would do next. Naomi looked around the cabin, locking eyes with several passengers. Their faces were a mix of relief, uncertainty, and hope. She understood the weight of the moment, and she knew that what she did next would set the tone for the future. "The behavior that has been displayed today will not be tolerated," Naomi said, her voice echoing through the cabin. "I've worked hard to create an environment of respect and excellence, and it's clear that we have a long way to go, but we will get there together." The flight attendants remained silent, watching Naomi with a mixture of fear and respect. They had never witnessed this level of authority, this calm and decisive action in the face of adversity. Naomi had managed to hold her ground without raising her voice, without losing control, yet her power was undeniable. Turning to Grace, the junior flight attendant who had quietly observed the entire situation, Naomi offered a small nod. "You handled yourself well today. Thank you for standing up when it mattered." Grace's eyes widened in surprise, her heart swelling with both admiration and gratitude. Naomi had just acknowledged her, and that simple recognition meant more than any promotion or praise. It was validation. Naomi didn't wait for any further responses. She turned back to face the aisle, her posture straight and strong. "We will work on making sure this never happens again," she said firmly. "And the first step starts today." The plane's atmosphere had shifted entirely, with passengers now caught between awe and respect. Naomi's authority was undeniable, and every eye in the cabin was fixed on her. The flight attendants had fallen silent, aware that Naomi had already set the stage for something far greater than just the confrontation at hand. Naomi turned her attention back to Lauren, who was still nervously waiting at the rear of the plane. The flight attendant's shoulders were slumped in defeat, her earlier bravado completely gone. It was clear she understood that there was no escaping the consequences of her actions. "Lauren," Naomi called out sharply, her voice cutting through the hushed cabin. The flight attendant straightened, her head snapping up at the sound of her name. You're suspended, effective immediately. You'll meet with your manager at the next stop. And I'll be personally overseeing an investigation into how you've treated not just me, but other passengers. Lauren opened her mouth to protest, but Naomi's unyielding gaze silenced her before she could speak. This is not a request. You don't get to decide whether or not you face the consequences. Your actions today were unacceptable, and I intend to ensure this doesn't go unaddressed. The passengers exchanged glances, their eyes wide as they realized the seriousness of the situation. No one had expected this. Naomi, a calm and unassuming figure just moments ago, had taken complete control of the moment and commanded respect. Naomi continued, her tone steady. The rest of the crew will receive training in diversity and customer service. We will ensure that this type of incident does not happen again. If you don't understand the impact of your behavior, we'll make sure you do. The reality of Naomi's actions began to set in as the tension in the cabin eased, though the weight of the moment lingered. Lauren, her face pale, looked down at the floor, her once confident demeanor shattered. Naomi, in contrast, stood strong, her eyes scanning the cabin, locking eyes with several of the passengers who had silently witnessed the events unfold. Before we land, I want everyone to understand what just happened, Naomi said, her voice cutting through the remaining murmurs. I didn't do this to humiliate anyone. I did this because I know that, as a leader, I have the responsibility to set a standard. Everyone on this plane deserves respect, no matter who they are or what they look like. Her gaze swept across the cabin, making sure her words resonated with every person on board. Today wasn't about power. It was about fairness, about making sure that no one ever feels less than just because of who they are. Naomi paused for a moment, allowing her words to settle. She could feel the shift in the room, the quiet acknowledgement from the passengers that this was more than just a personal dispute. It was about something bigger. I want to thank all of you for your patience, Naomi continued, for witnessing something that should never have happened, but also for understanding that real change happens when we all stand up for what's right. She turned to Grace, who had been watching in silent admiration, and nodded. Grace, thank you for stepping in when it mattered, she said, her tone softer now. We could use more people like you. Grace's face lit up with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. She hadn't expected to be acknowledged, but Naomi's recognition meant everything. It was a signal that even small acts of bravery could make a difference in the face of institutionalized prejudice. With the confrontation settled, Naomi moved toward the back of the plane, the energy of the cabin subtly shifting. The passengers, now with a clearer understanding of Naomi's role and the weight of her actions, turned back to their seats, many quietly reflecting on the lesson they had just witnessed. Naomi had not only addressed a single instance of discrimination but had set the stage for change within the airline, and possibly beyond. As the plane began its descent, the cabin buzzed with whispered conversations. The passengers who had witnessed Naomi's confrontation with Lauren were now processing what had unfolded. Naomi's calm authority had dismantled the tension in the air, but the weight of her words still lingered. The flight attendants, previously unsure and uncomfortable, now stood straighter, their eyes lowered in thought as they reflected on Naomi's actions. The crew had seen firsthand the power of accountability, and they understood that Naomi wasn't just a passenger to be dismissed. She was a force to be reckoned with. Naomi stood at the front of the plane, her posture tall and confident, as she surveyed the cabin one final time. She had made her point, not just to Lauren but to everyone on board. And now, with the impending landing, she knew her work wasn't done. I expect to see changes across this airline, Naomi said, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. I will be following up with senior management and ensuring that this is addressed at every level. This is not just about one flight attendant. It's about making sure everyone on board, and everyone who interacts with our airline, is treated with the respect they deserve. There was a brief pause as Naomi's words sunk in. The passengers were silent, but their expressions told the story. They had been witness to something important, something that would ripple far beyond this flight. The plane finally came to a gentle halt on the tarmac, the passengers still processing the events that had unfolded in the air. The once tense and uncomfortable atmosphere had shifted, leaving behind a sense of quiet resolve. As the cabin door opened and the passengers began to deboard, the weight of Naomi's actions continued to linger in the air. Naomi, standing tall as always, glanced toward the back of the plane where Lauren was now waiting by the exit. She wasn't the same confident flight attendant Naomi had encountered earlier. Now, Lauren's demeanor was broken. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of the realization that her actions had consequences. Naomi approached the exit slowly, her gaze fixed on the ground in front of her, then looking up at Lauren for a final moment. "You'll be hearing from HR," Naomi said, her tone firm but not unkind. "This is just the beginning, and I hope you learn from this, not just for your career, but for your own growth." Lauren opened her mouth, but no words came out. She nodded, accepting Naomi's words with the understanding that there was nothing she could say to justify her actions. The passengers filed out, many of them offering quiet nods of approval or supportive glances toward Naomi. Naomi walked toward the terminal, her stride purposeful and unbroken. She could already feel the change she had set in motion. It wasn't about one individual. It was about setting an example that would echo through the organization, and she was prepared for the work ahead. Naomi's walk through the terminal felt different now. The busy airport, filled with voices and hurried footsteps, seemed quieter in her mind, as if the weight of her actions had carved out a space for reflection. As she approached the exit, she was joined by Grace, the junior flight attendant who had witnessed everything. Grace, her face filled with both admiration and awe, kept pace beside Naomi. "You really did it?" Grace said softly, her voice filled with disbelief. "You stood up to her, to all of them, and you made sure this doesn't go unchecked." Naomi glanced at Grace, her expression soft but resolute. It wasn't just about standing up to someone. It was about showing everyone what respect looks like and what it should feel like. "This wasn't just a battle for me. It was a reminder for everyone to stop tolerating things that are wrong." Grace nodded, absorbing Naomi's words. "I never imagined someone could take control of a situation like that. It was incredible." Naomi smiled faintly. "It's not about power. It's about standing firm in your truth and doing what's right. That's where the real power lies." As they reached the terminal exit, Naomi felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Not from winning, but from knowing she had created the space for real change. Naomi wasn't just a passenger anymore. She had become the catalyst for something far more significant. The sound of Naomi's phone ringing broke the silence as she and Grace stepped out into the sunlight. Naomi glanced at the screen. It was a call from senior management. She knew this was just the beginning of the larger process of addressing the incident. "Naomi," the voice on the other end greeted her, a tone of urgency in its familiarity. "We've seen the footage. We're already making changes. We wanted to thank you for handling the situation the way you did. We'll be meeting with you soon to discuss how we can implement new policies." Naomi paused for a moment before responding, her gaze distant as she let the weight of the situation settle. "I appreciate that, but the real work starts now. We need to ensure this goes beyond one person's behavior and becomes a cultural shift." The voice on the other end agreed. "Absolutely. We've already started reviewing the crew's training and internal policies. We'll be meeting with you shortly to discuss the details." Naomi ended the call and turned to Grace, who had been silently observing. Naomi took a deep breath, her expression contemplative. "This isn't going to be easy. Change never is. But today was a necessary first step. It's time to make sure every passenger gets the service they deserve. Not just those who are elite, but everyone." Grace smiled, her admiration for Naomi growing. "I'll be ready to help however I can. This is bigger than we thought." Naomi nodded. "It's about equality, and it's about time." The two walked toward the exit of the airport, the sun casting a long shadow behind them. Naomi knew that her actions had already begun to create a ripple effect, one that would lead to more significant changes not only in the airline but within the industry. It was a moment of quiet victory, but Naomi knew the real work was just beginning. As Naomi stepped away from the terminal, The sunlight caught the edges of the glass doors, casting a soft glow around her. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the day's events had set something in motion, something bigger than herself. But that satisfaction was tempered by the realization that the real work was still ahead. She dialed her phone, the connection quickly establishing. "Diane, it's Naomi. I need you to schedule an urgent meeting with senior management. We've got a lot of work ahead of us." Diane's voice came through, clear and professional. "Of course, Naomi. We've been tracking the situation here. We'll get a meeting scheduled, and I'll bring in the right people." Naomi walked with purpose as she spoke, the weight of responsibility not overwhelming but motivating her. "I need the board to understand that this goes beyond just policy changes. It's about fostering a culture that supports all employees and passengers. This airline needs to reflect that." Diane agreed. "Absolutely. I'll make sure everyone is on board with this approach." Naomi ended the call and took a deep breath. The work wasn't just about creating policies. It was about changing minds, shifting perspectives, and embedding respect at every level of the company. And that change started now. The quiet of the airport gave Naomi a brief moment of reflection. As she waited for the next steps, she realized that today wasn't just about holding one person accountable. It was about creating a ripple effect that would reach beyond this flight, beyond this airline. It was about something much bigger. Naomi sat down at one of the nearby benches, pulling out her laptop to review some of the company's internal reports. She scanned through the data, noticing the clear disparities in customer service across different demographics. This wasn't a new discovery. It was something she had known for a while, but today it felt more urgent than ever. "Diane," Naomi said as she placed a call to the head of operations, "I need a full analysis of how customers are being treated. I want to see the breakdown by demographic. We need to address these discrepancies head-on." Diane's response was immediate. "We'll get it for you, Naomi. I'm already pulling the reports. We'll review everything in detail." As Naomi closed her laptop and looked around, she knew that this data wasn't just a reflection of numbers. It was a reflection of people's lived experiences. And she was ready to take action to ensure that everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, felt equally respected. Naomi's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from the board members, confirming their meeting time. As the details of the meeting unfolded, Naomi began mentally preparing herself for the conversation she knew would be difficult, but necessary. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning, and Naomi planned to present a comprehensive report not only on the incident with Lauren but on the broader issues within the company. She needed to emphasize the systemic changes that were needed to address both the internal culture and the customer experience. As Naomi prepared for the meeting, her mind raced through all the facets of the transformation that was required. This wasn't just about training one flight attendant. This was about reviewing hiring practices, adjusting the language used in customer service interactions, and ensuring that the company's policies reflected a true commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. "I won't let this be another moment of performative action," Naomi said to herself, her tone firm with resolve. "This is about real, lasting change, and I will see it through." The next morning, Naomi entered the conference room, where the board members were already seated, their expressions serious but expectant. The room was large, modern, and impeccably designed. Everything about it screamed corporate success. But Naomi knew that the success of any organization wasn't measured by its profits alone. It was measured by how it treated its people. She stood in front of the room, holding the comprehensive report in her hands. "Thank you all for making the time to meet," Naomi began, her voice calm but carrying authority. "We need to talk about what happened on the plane yesterday, but more importantly, we need to talk about how we move forward." She set the report on the table and began walking the board members through the data she had gathered. "We've been treating some customers differently based on their appearance. We've been rewarding performance without fully considering the context of who those performances serve and who they might exclude." The board members listened intently as Naomi continued. She pointed out the discrepancies in customer feedback, highlighting the stories of passengers who felt unseen or disrespected. She detailed the ways that the company's existing policies weren't doing enough to bridge those gaps. "We're at a crossroads," Naomi said, her eyes meeting the eyes of each board member. "We have the opportunity to be a leader not just in business, but in corporate ethics. We can set the standard for how organizations should treat their employees, their customers, and the world at large. But it starts with us." The board members exchanged glances, and Naomi could see that her words were starting to sink in. This meeting, she realized, wasn't just about fixing a single incident. It was about creating a framework for long-term change. The day after the meeting with the board, Naomi walked into the company's headquarters, her mind set on the road ahead. She had made her point to the board, but now it was time to implement the changes that would follow. Naomi knew the transformation wasn't going to happen overnight, but she was ready to put in the work to make sure it happened. As she entered her office, her assistant handed her a stack of documents. Naomi flipped through them quickly, scanning for anything that required immediate attention. But her mind kept drifting back to the meeting and the commitment the board had made to her. The real work would begin when the company put its money where its mouth was. "Diane, I need you to pull together a team to lead the diversity and inclusion initiatives," Naomi said, speaking to the head of operations who had been on the front lines of gathering the data. "We need real, actionable steps to move this company forward. I'm talking about new policies, training programs, and a way to measure our progress." Diane's voice was firm on the other end of the line. "Already on it, Naomi. We're setting up meetings with HR and the training department. We'll be ready to roll out the first phase next week." Naomi nodded, her gaze fixed on the window overlooking the city. This was more than just a corporate initiative. It was a mission to rebuild trust within the company and with the public. And it would take every ounce of effort to ensure that the changes they promised were real. The first phase of Naomi's diversity initiative began to take shape in the following weeks. Meetings were held, new policies were discussed, and the company's leadership began to understand that this wasn't a temporary fix. It was a culture shift. Naomi led the charge, ensuring every department was on board with the new direction. She sat down in her office late one evening, reviewing the progress reports. She had seen improvements in some areas, but there was still much to be done. The policies were in place, but Naomi knew the real test would come when it was time to hold people accountable, especially those who had been in positions of power for years, unwilling to acknowledge the bias that had taken root in the company. Her phone rang, and she answered without hesitation. It was one of the board members who had initially been hesitant to support such sweeping changes. "Naomi, I just wanted to check in," the voice said, tentative. "How are things going with the new initiatives? I know we've made a lot of promises, but I wanted to hear from you directly." Naomi leaned back in her chair, considering her response. "It's going well, but we're still in the early stages. We've set up the framework, but now we need to make sure everyone from top to bottom is held accountable. This isn't just a series of training sessions. It's a new way of doing business." The board member's tone was filled with concern but also respect. "Understood. We're all in on this, Naomi. Let me know what you need." As she hung up the phone, Naomi felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper on her shoulders. This wasn't just about changing a single company, it was about changing an industry, and Naomi was ready to lead that charge. Months passed, and the changes within the company became more evident. Naomi's leadership had led to a shift in not only how employees interacted with customers, but also how they viewed their own responsibilities. The focus had shifted from performance metrics alone to how well the company was living up to its values. Naomi sat in a conference room, reviewing the final draft of the company's new customer service manual. The words on the page now reflected the principles she had fought so hard to establish: equity, respect, and fairness. These weren't just buzzwords. They were the foundation of how the company would operate going forward. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges to overcome and biases to unlearn, but they had made a significant step forward. The door opened, and Diane entered, holding a tablet. "We've got the latest data from the customer satisfaction surveys," she said, her voice filled with anticipation. "The results are already showing improvement. The feedback is overwhelmingly positive. Naomi smiled, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was one of quiet satisfaction. "We've still got a long way to go," she said, "but this is a start. It's proof that the work we've done has made a difference." Diane sat down across from Naomi, her face reflecting the same sense of resolve. "We've set a precedent. Now it's up to us to keep moving forward." Naomi stood, looking out the window at the skyline. "This is just the beginning, but I'm proud of what we've achieved so far, and I know that together, we'll make sure it continues." For more chilling true time crime stories, subscribe to our channel and don't forget to like and share.